Hello and welcome to Board Game Gumbo. Today we're unboxing High Rise from Formal Ferret Games. This is a game for 1 to 4 players, so there are solo rules. And it plays in 100 to 150 minutes, which is a bit of an odd play timer, but that's what they say. So, as you can imagine from the name of the game, your objective is to build the largest buildings on the game board. And you can see that very nice board game art. So let's see what we've got in here. We've got a cloth bag. This is for the different resources that you'll get throughout the course of the game. Sometimes you draw them randomly, so there's a little bag. We've got some figure bases here. You'll be building these cardboard buildings, and these bases you'll use to determine who owns them. So if the red player builds a building, they'll put it on a red base and so on. So 4 different player colors, as you can see. We've got some cards here. Each player is going to have 3 tokens in their color. 1 is essentially your worker, which you'll be moving around the board. 1 is for your victory points, and the last one is for a corruption track, which is kind of like corruption in Lords of Waterdeep. If you've ever played that, it's negative points at the end of the game. Also, there are some mechanics in the game that specifically target the person with the most corruption. So that's something to keep in mind. We've got some little extension cardboard pieces here. So you can basically, after you've built a building, you can build it a little bit higher. And these little cardboard pieces will slot onto the top of your building when you do that, which is kind of interesting and, a neat little piece to add to the game. This sort of 3-ply cardboard piece. We've got some more pieces here and some extra bags, which we always like to see. We like bags. But let's get down here to our rule book and then hopefully our player board. So this rule book is pretty hefty. Again, I love the artwork on this, both the board and the rule book here. There are 3 types of play. So there's an introductory game, standard, and then full game. The introductory game kind of jump starts the game to get you a better understanding quicker. The only difference, I believe, between the standard and the full game is the standard game you play 2 full rotations of the board, and the full game you play 3. Here is the board layout itself, and it looks pretty chaotic, but honestly, it's pretty straightforward once you get into the actual rules. More on the setup. This is a pretty hefty rule book. We're not even halfway through here. Here's our end of round. So you get points based off the buildings that you build. So you'll get points just based off of how tall they are. If you build a 4-point building, it'll be worth 4 points to you. But you also get points for having the tallest building in each zone of the game. Here's our end of game. So here is the variant if you're playing 1 and 2 player games. And then this just looks like an explanation of the different iconography in the game. So that's a good portion of the book and more of that art that I really like. Here's our scoreboard. So 2 tracks. We've got the score track here with the star, and then the corruption track with the briefcase. So if you take 1 corruption, it's -1 point. But if you take, you get into the higher points of corruption, it jumps up to 18 and 22. And these are negative points, like I said, that you'll score at the end of the game. So we have a bunch of punchboard here, which we'll go ahead and take out so that we can take a look at our game board. So it'll be a lot easier to explain the rest of these components with the game board out. So here's our board, and it is double-sided. I'm going to assume one side is for solo and 2-player, but I don't see much of a difference. So let's just put it out here. So the board is the different actions that you can take, and the players will start over here on this starting zone. And this is also where they'll end. There's really only a couple rules to movement in this game, but one is that you always end in this final spot here, and the round will end when everybody's in this final spot. But what you're going to do on your turn is you're going to move your worker around the board however many spaces you choose to. The person who's the active player is always the person who's farthest back on the board. So if you're playing with 4 players, the person who's in this last spot here is going to be the first player to take an action. And they can move as far as they want. They could move to one of these locations, or they could move to one of these locations, or they could go all the way over here if they wanted to. They can move as far as they want. There's only a couple rules with movement. One is that you can't end where there's another person. And the second is that you can't move into an area that's in the same zone that you were in the last round. So if you'll notice here, these 4 spaces here are all the East Gardens. So if I moved to this space, on my next turn, I can't then move to this space. But again, the person who's active, the person who's moving, is the person who's farthest back. So if you're in this space and everybody else is on the other side of the board, you may be able to take several movements. You just can't move into here. You could move from here to here, and then to here, and then to here, and so on. So you can potentially take several movements or several turns in repetition. These spots right here, which don't have any actions currently attached to them, are going to get an action from different tiles that you'll punch out. So here's our punch board. We've got our 5 basic resources here. And what I like about these, aside from the fact that these are nice, punching out really well, is the fact that they're color coded. But if you have anybody who has color blindness, they are also shape coded as well. So that's pretty nice. And again, these are just basic resources that you'll accumulate, that you'll need to build buildings, and these will go into that bag that we had earlier. Sometimes you'll be able to draw whatever color you want, but a lot of times you'll be going into this bag randomly. This is sort of a wild card resource that you can gain throughout the course of the game. That won't go in the bag. Those will just go into their own little pile. What we're looking at here are these little action tiles. So we'll punch out these action tiles here, and these will all be of a particular area. So these are all downtown, which is this location over here. So at the start of the game, you're going to shuffle up. These are all downtown tiles. So you're going to shuffle up all of these, and obviously there's 9, but you're only going to put out up to 4. If you're playing with less than 4 players, you'll actually put out as many as there are players. So if you're playing with 3, there'll only be 3. So there's a little bit of variability there, but you'll just shuffle these up, and these will be locations that you can go to. And that's what these locations, if you go to them, will give you. They'll give you whatever's on this tile. So this one allows you to draw once, and drawing is drawing resources from the bag for each neighborhood you're in and not the tallest. And this one is trade union. Choose. You may gain corruption to choose again. So choose is where you decide what you're getting from the bag. You don't have to draw randomly. You just get whatever you want. And here is the little corruption mechanic. Essentially, you can increase the strength of an action by taking corruption. And then here we've got gain 1 ultra plastic, which is that wild resource. Then you draw randomly from the bag, and you gain a corruption. So this one isn't optional. This one is. You can just gain 1, or you can pay a corruption to gain 2. This one, you have to gain corruption. There's no option to it. So we've got some more punch board here for different components. And then we've got several different boards for that. And they're mostly the same. You've got your resources here. You've got these action tiles for each specific area. And then you've got these tiles here. And these are actually have numbers on them. And this is the rounds. So 2010 is the first round, 2020 is the second round, and then 2030 is the third round. But the rest of these boards are essentially the same, just giving you more variability and the tokens to different areas. Our other punch board is for our buildings. So we've got buildings that go up to, looks like 15 is the highest here. Yes. So 15 is going to be the largest building that you'll be able to build with these. But again, we did have these little extensions, which will just slot on like that. So if I built a 15 height building and I was the red player, I'd simply put my base on it, and then I decide where to build it. When you take an action to build, there are actions to build in the different areas. So if you're constructing in the East Gardens and you go to this location, you just build in the East Gardens. But here, if you build in the East Gardens, you're fine. But if you're constructing anywhere else on the board, which is an option, you have to take a corruption. And here you have to take 2 corruption if you're not in the East Gardens. Lastly, we've got these cards here, and these are going to relate mostly to those action tiles we saw earlier. So a lot of the action tiles will give you these cards, and they're numbered. They're by area. Well, they're not organized, but you can see that they're by area and they're also by number, just to make them a little bit easier to organize. Obviously, you're going to have to go through this and organize them, but you got different abilities on here. You've got, if you construct the version of a blueprint, you gain 1 extra floor. These are cards that you'll gain, and then some of them will be one-time use, and some of them will just be permanent abilities, and then some of them will be once per round, essentially, which I believe is what this green arrow means. Essentially, if I take this action, I then flip it over, and when we go into the next era, whatever era that may be, I'll get the action back to be able to take it again. I think the only thing we've got left here is this bag here. So one thing we have here is the construction zone for each player. So each player will get one of these cards. And this explains a couple different things. This is based on error, so you got 2020 and 2030 here. This explains scoring. This is the highest in each area. So in 2020, if you have the highest building in an area, you're going to score 2 extra points. And then these are where you'll hold your resources. And you can only have that many resources. This is for the introductory game. So if you flip it over, now it tells you 2010, 2020, and 2030. So that's the side you probably want. But you've got your construction area here, and that's where you'll hold your resources when you gain them. You'll put them in this area. So obviously you're restricted by the number of spaces here. Of course, you can buy extra, but they cost corruption. If you buy them in 2010 or the first round, they cost you 3 corruption, then 2, and then 1. So you can hold more resources if you want to. Finally, we have the blueprints, and this is how you're going to build your buildings, which is obviously a big part of the game. You've got them by round, so you've got 2010s, 2020s, and 2030s, and you've got several of each. You're only going to use 1 each time. So 1 2010, 1 2020, 1 2030. And the nice thing about these is that for the ones you don't end up using, on the back is a cheat sheet with all your iconography and explaining it. So these, the ones you don't use, end up becoming your player guides for your players, which is pretty smart, I think. Also, these are really nice quality. They're almost, they're basically cardstock quality. So basically this explains how you build a building. If you go to this one of these locations, and there's one for each zone. So you see there's one for East Gardens here, but there's one for downtown on the other side of the board. Whenever you go there, you can build a building, and each type of building takes different types of resources. You can use these green resources as wilds. So if you went here, you could pay 1 gray, 1 red, and 1 purple, or you could pay 1 gray, 1 red, and 1 green. On these final 2, if you pay these resources, and you can swap them out for wilds, In addition to a wild, you get an extra floor level. So the floor level you get depends on how many resources you're spending. If you're spending 2 resources, you get a 2 height building. This +1 is for the first person of each round. So we had some little cardboard we punched out earlier, which are these tokens here, and these will basically sit down here. And whenever somebody builds for the first time, they'll cover this spot up. So the first person to build this building will actually get a 3 height building, but everybody else will only get a 2 because they're only spending 2 resources. The way these last 2 work is that if you spend exactly what's stated here, plus the green, you get an additional 1. So you're spending 4 resources. If you're the first person, you're getting a +1. And if you spend exactly these 4 resources, you're getting a +1. So this 4 can actually turn into a 6. And the same with this 5 can turn into a 7. And like I said, there's a different one for each era. They get progressively higher. It's always still the same +1 bonus, and this green ultra plastic works the same way. So you'll play through 3 full rounds, moving around the board, taking whatever actions you want, always remembering that the last player or the player furthest back is always the active player. Building out your buildings and scoring for your buildings. At the end of each round, you're also going to score for who has the tallest buildings in each area. And then you're going to do that for 3 full rounds. At the end of that round, you're going to calculate your final VPs for tallest building in each area, and then subtract your corruption. And the person with the most points is going to be the winner. And that's everything you're going to get in a copy of High Rise from Formal Ferret Games.